Right, next we're going to start with the external contour of the teeth. And for this, we're going to use the blue wax. So with the external contours, we're going to try to get the mesial portion of the triangular ridge on the maxillary to contact with the distal portion of the external contour of the mandibular premolars. And we're going to try to do the same thing with the molars. So let's consider, when we're building it up, that this is the mesial lobe, this is the distal facial lobe or the distal buccal lobe, and this is the distal lobe. So between the lobes we're going to have the buccal developmental groove. So our contact area is right over there. And if we can get enough of a bulk here on the buccal portion of the premolars, then we'll be able to have our contact right there too, right in this area, and then right in that area. Next we'll go over to the second molar. We could probably overbuild the contours a little bit so that we can use our instruments to kind of carve them down smoothly so that they line up with the contours of the teeth. So if we notice now, we are starting to have these look like teeth. We are actually replacing whatever we cut off for the purpose of the exercise. So once we've done this, then we're going to take the instrument and carve this down exactly to the contour of the teeth. Make sure we get our embrasures nice and even and anatomically correct. Here's our buccal groove, and we're contouring it straight down all the way to be even with the tooth structure. Carve away too much, then we'll have to re-add. And double check to make sure that we have enough of overjet so our patient doesn't have problems biting their cheek. So once we have done our buccal contours, then we're going to the lingual area. And remember to do it one lobe at a time. So as you come together to the two lobes, you're going to create the lingual developmental groove. If we melt it together a little too much there, we can always carve it in later. If we use the right heat on the wax, it will probably join together and it will form the groove on its own. Again, we can add a little bit extra wax so we can carve it down afterwards to the right contour. Now if we ended up tilting the lingual cusps a little bit too much towards the buccal, then we can add a little bit more here on the cusp tips, a little more blue, and kind of tilt them out towards the lingual a little bit more. So now we're going to go in and recontour these areas. If we break anything off like that, it's easy enough to re-add. Just make sure you wait until the wax cools before you try carving it again. So meanwhile that this is cooling, we can just move on and start carving the rest of the teeth. And then once we get to the end of that, then we can come back and recarve that area there. So we're making making our embrasure spaces here. This will allow us to make our teeth look more individualized. I'll go back here and recarve it carefully. Now here, these cusp tips, we could probably adjust them a little bit more. Maybe take out a little bit more from the inside to give us a little bit more space for our triangular ridges, and maybe even make some secondary grooves in there. This tooth here, we may be able to bring out that lingual cusp a little bit more. Just to kind of make it even with that third molar. This is also going to give us a nice thick wall here, so if we need to, we can even take out a little bit more from the inside and give us a little bit more space. So if we notice here, our contacts should be right here in the mesial part of this triangular ridge, mesial part of this triangular ridge on the first maxillary premolar, and then we'll have this one's going to touch at the embrasure right here. This one's going to touch the distal triangular ridge on the mesial area, and this one is also on the mesial there, and the mesial of the distal buccal triangular ridge right there. So now we can start the contralateral side, and we'll do just about the same thing. Make sure we have enough space to put our blue wax here, and again we're going to maybe over wax it slightly so that we can take it back. Once we added the wax, and we can close it in. We can do it one by one. It's probably going to be a little bit more predictable, but you see right here in the second premolar I added too much, so I kind of squished it. And we can just go back later and carve it down a little bit. You can even do it now. I'm just going to carve it down to give us a little bit more area. This way we can make sure that we close it all the way down when we're adding the rest, and we're sure that we're not raising up the occlusion. Because if you start increasing the occlusion little by little, eventually by the time you reach the end, you're going to raise it so much to the point where you lost control of the whole project. So you're probably better off just taking off, if you put in an excess of wax, you gotta take it down a little bit so that you'll only have that tiny little contact there. You always want to hear your models clicking. You don't want that soft click like it's clicking into the wax. Squished it even more, so let's make sure we take that all down, and later we can re-add that little contact. Always want to hear that. Let's take that down a little bit. This area is pretty close, so if you over add the wax, you can end up kind of smashing it down. So let's just take it down to the tooth structure, and I'm sure we're pretty much going to get the exact contact there. So we have a little contact right now, right in that area right there, and right in that area right there. Now we're going to move on to the second molar. Here it's so close that I'm not going to over add too much. So now that we waited a little bit for the wax to cool, and we're going to go over it with a little bit of a sharper instrument, very slowly. And just carve over the tooth, open up the embrasure, make sure the tooth looks natural. And if you're following exactly the contour of the buccal side of the tooth, you have no choice but to make it look natural. So if you notice, we have our contacts right where we need them to be. The mesial portion of the buccal triangular ridges on the maxillary premolars. We have the mesial portions of the mesiobuccal and distobuccal triangular ridges on the first molar and the second molar. So that's exactly where we need them to be. So now we're going to go over to the lingual side of the teeth. So make sure we use the right amount of heat so that we don't flow everything together. If there's a cusp that's very close to the other one, you can move on to the following tooth, and once that cusp cools, you can go back and add a little bit more wax to the adjacent cusp right here. So that's our lingual side. Now once this cools down, we can shape it down to where the tooth is. Oops. Sometimes if you don't heat the wax up enough, it doesn't bond to the under layer of wax, and when you try to carve it, it will pop off. Also, if you press too hard, it might happen that way too. You might pop it off the model. So you're better off doing it gently and just back and forth and back and forth. At it from the occlusal surface, make sure that we have our embrasure spaces opened up properly so that we can make those teeth look separate. Just divide. At this point we can divide the marginal ridges. Eventually we might want to raise them up a little bit just to see if we can get contact with the maxillary. So let's look at it from the top, from the sides. Now this one, I think we can probably open it up a little bit more from the inside of the fish mouth. This will give us plenty of space for our triangular ridges. The neater we are now, and the more careful we are to design these fish mouths, the easier it will be for us to design our triangular ridges and all of our grooves. Make sure we do this gently so we don't break the teeth. This tooth is the most challenging one because it's the smallest occlusal surface, so we have to be super careful so that we don't break the outside contours as we are making room on the inside here. Okay, so that's our outside contours of our occlusal. Until we're sure we are satisfied with our fish mouths, do not continue on to the next step. So make sure that all your contours are neat and clean and you have all of your embrasures opened properly. This way we'll have to do that much less at the end of the project. So there we go.